This video will be over the skull, both internal and inferior views. If you remove the top of the skull and look down into it from a superior view, you will see a skull that looks like this. Here's the frontal bone, the ethmoid bone in the middle, the butterfly or bat-shaped sphenoid bone, the temporal bones, and the occipital bone. You'll also notice holes, or what we call foramen. Let's look at a picture to help us with this. First, let's look at the sphenoid bone. In the central portion of it, you'll see a depression called the sella turcica. The pituitary gland is protected by this sella turcica. Three of the foramen you'll see here are the foramen ovale, which is oval-shaped, a small foramen spinosum next to it, and a foramen rotundum anterior to it. Rotundum, ovale, spinosum. Medial to these foramen is the foramen lacerum, which gets its name because it looks like it's torn or lacerated. This portion is the temporal bone, and you'll notice there's a large foramen here called the jugular foramen, and then a smaller canal called the internal acoustic meatus. This is where the cranial nerve for hearing comes through from the inner ear, and this is where the internal jugular vein travels. The nerve for hearing goes through the internal acoustic meatus, and the internal jugular vein goes through the jugular foramen. Another part you want to know are the lesser wings of the sphenoid bone. And you also see here the greater wings, the greater wing of the sphenoid on each side. Here's a closer view of the same thing. So we're looking here at the sella turcica, which literally means Turkish saddle. And here is a Turkish saddle. So this depression you see here is also one here, which is a little harder to see in a picture. Here's the foramen ovale, and the smaller foramen spinosum, and the foramen lacerum. Another part you can see is the crista galli, which literally means rooster's comb, because it sticks out like part of this rooster's comb does. And it might be hard to tell here without looking at it from the side, but that's a protrusion, and your meninges attach to the crista galli. If we look back here, we see here the ethmoid bone, and here is the crista galli. You can also see small holes in this structure where the olfactory nerves come through from your nose. And you'll notice the smaller holes here called olfactory foramina. The A at the end is plural, so foramina is plural for foramen. Another structure you see here is the hypoglossal canal. The hypoglossal cranial nerve goes through that hole. And again, here is the foramen magnum. Coming back to our actual skull, here is that plate containing these small holes called olfactory foramen. So keep in mind the frontal sinus here is the same sinus you see here in green. And this is a sagittal view of that sinus. You want to be able to look at a skull or a picture like this and be able to name the structures you see that I just went over. You want to name the bones, and you want to name the bone markings, which can be foramen or the sella turcica, or might be the crista galli sticking up. It might be the lesser wing or the greater wing of the sphenoid, or the jugular foramen, or the internal acoustic meatus you see here. The foramen ovale, the foramen spinosum, the foramen lacerum, And the other one you see in this view is the foramen rotundum. Another structure I want to point out to you from this inferior view are the condyles on either side of the foramen magnum. Because these are part of the occipital bone, they're called occipital condyles, and they attach to the first cervical vertebra. Here is the mandible with the mental protuberance in the front and the body, this part that goes all the way around, and then the angle here that goes up vertically to form the ramus. And at the end of that ramus, there is a coronoid process, a mandibular notch, and then the condylar process. And this is what connects to the temporal bone. On the inside of the ramus, you'll notice a mandibular foramen. That covers the internal markings of the skull. The next video will be over the rest of the axial skeleton, the vertebra, the ribs, and the sternum.